안녕하세요. 메이커스의 세 번째 여름 설명회를 시작하겠습니다. 오늘은 SAT, ACT 전문가분들이 시험 변화의 핵심 포인트를 자세하게 설명해 주실 예정이며 더불어 주니어 잉글리시에 대한 설명회도 이어질 예정이니 끝까지 많은 관심 부탁드리겠습니다. 오늘 3차 설명회 첫 번째 강사님을 소개해 드리겠습니다. UCLA를 졸업하시고 컬리지 에세이 컨설턴트로도 오랜 경력을 쌓아오신 저희 아로미 선생님이십니다. 오랜 기간 수많은 학생들의 ACT 성적 향상을 이끌어오신 아로미 선생님은 현재 메이커스어학원의 ACT 대표 강사님으로 활동 중이시며 풍부한 경험과 전략적인 지도로 수많은 학생들의 목표 점수를 달성하게 만든 검증된 실력자이십니다. 2025년 ACT 변화와 학습 전략에 대해서 들을 수 있는 좋은 시간이 될 것 같습니다. 그럼 아로미 선생님을 모시겠습니다.
Hi, my name is Ahromi, and I'm super excited to tell you about the ACTs today. So my name is Ahromi, and I have a lot of experience teaching the SATs and the ACTs, and I have years of experience teaching students from all levels. And so whether it is from elementary school or middle school or high school, or even at the college level, I've been teaching students how to attack the standardized exam. Now, you guys all may be listening to today's lecture because there have been some changes to the ACT coming up this year. And the biggest change so far is that it's becoming digitized. Now, this is following the digitalization of the SATs, but how will it look like on the ACTs? It's not going to be that big of a change between the two exams. However, this is because for a long time there have been complaints from educators and the students and the parents about how difficult these standardized exams are. They're fairly long, they're 3 hours. The passages are an entire page long, and not only that, the students are lacking stamina to follow through on 3 hours of questions back to back. And therefore, over the years, their scores have been decreasing over time. And so the ACTs, in order to respond to the feedback from all of these people, have been undergoing these changes to make the exam a little bit easier to do and a little bit more efficient for the students. And so with these changes, you can expect the scores from the students to be a lot more increased, and they will be expecting some fairly competitive scores to get into some really good schools as well. Now, what are some other big changes we can expect on the ACTs? Well, first of all, you're going to have a decrease in the number of questions, a total of 44 questions. Number two, the amount of time that you're given on the test is going to be reduced as well. So normally it was on average about 3 hours, and now it's turning into 2 hours, 125 minutes. And so what that means for each question is you're going to have a little bit more time to solve each question, and so you're going to be thinking a lot more on each one. Number three, for each question, there's going to be more time that you can spend on it. And number four, for science especially, and for math, they are going to be reducing the number of options for the questions, for the answers, from 5 to 4. So then what that means for the students is they're going to have a little bit of an increased chance of getting the correct answer because it goes from 25%, right? And the last change that is going to be made is that for the science section, it's going to become optional. And so for students who are kind of not so great with the STEM, they can opt out of it. But for the other ones who think, okay, I'm pretty good with science and I want to highlight this for the colleges moving forward on my CV or on my resume, then they can choose to put that score as part of the STEM score, which is going to be combined with the math score as well. Now, this graph is showing you the number of students or the popularity of the ACT versus the SAT. So as you have seen from a long time ago, the SAT and the ACT were fairly similar. They were parallel to each other, and so there hasn't been any changes for a couple decades until at this point in 2012, which is where you see the SATs becoming a lot less popular than the ACTs. And the reason for that is due to several things. Number one, students have been finding the SATs a lot harder. The questions were definitely becoming more competitive, and it was becoming near impossible to get a perfect score. And this is in 2012 when they reached a record low on the average score for the SATs. So there were a lot of complaints about that. And also, there was complaints about inequality between the classes. So on the SATs, there were certain questions that gave higher class students a little bit of an advantage of getting the correct question because those students had access to academies and extra tutoring And also, certain words on the vocabulary were only words that upper class students would have known. And so that was another complaint. And because of that, you can see that there has been a drastic change between the popularity of the two exams. However, in 2012 is also when another big change occurred. This is when David Coleman, who used to work for something called the Common Core Standards, which implements the standard skills that students should know from kindergarten to all the way up to high school. And he moved from the Common Core to becoming head of the College Board. And he took over the SATs. And then once he took over, he started implementing all of these big changes to the SAT to make it become a little bit more competitive. And so once he started doing that, the SATs started going back up in popularity. And so in 2016 is when it reached its peak, and that's when it became digitized. And because of David Coleman's changes to the SAT, it became much more popular than the ACTs. And so people forgot about the ACTs. And because of that, the ACTs wanted to keep up with the SATs. And this is why they are implementing the changes now. Now, you can see a big drop over here in 2020, but that's because of COVID. But after COVID, it started to go back up. What we should remember, however, is as soon as the SAT implemented the changes and became digitized, there was a little bit of a gap, a small period of time where the student scores were boosted. They were a little bit higher than average. And so we predict that same thing is going to happen to the ACTs as soon as those changes are made as well. Now, what that means for you as parents and as students is that once those changes take place, which is actually now, you have to take the ACT. You have to take advantage of it because this is when your score is going to get that big boost. So take advantage now because later on, and this is happening to the SATs, this is what we can see now, it is going to go back to how it normally was, how difficult it was from before. So when I see the SATs now, the digital version, and compare it to the paper version from before, the difficulty level is becoming very much similar. And so similarly to the ACTs, it's going to be pretty easy at first. We predict that it's going to be a little bit more simpler in terms of passages and question types and the answer choices for the students, and you will be able to see that increase in the score. Now, it will start to regress back to normal later on, but this is our prediction. So the rollouts are happening very gradually, progressively, and it's not happening right away. And this is just to help the students acclimate to the new changes. So in February, there were no changes, and starting from this month is when the digital ACT was introduced. Now, the new format of the ACT is only going to be available digitally only in April, June, and July. However, starting in September is when you can see it both on the digital format and the paper format as well. But this gives students a huge advantage over the SATs because for students who like writing on the paper and then making annotations, they would much prefer the paper version. Because if you're like me and your eyes aren't that great, I have to squint at the screen right now, you might prefer to look at the paper. And also, if you prefer the analog format and like to underline and highlight as you go and mark up the passages, the paper format is much better for you. However, if you're Gen Alpha and you're Gen Z and you're really good at technology and you prefer that, then take the digital version on the laptop. And one more thing to note is, because it's coming out in September, you have a window of time to prepare for that. This is why you should come to Makers and take the ACT prep course now. This is the moment, okay? So what are the strategies going into the ACTs? How can you get a perfect score? It's fairly easy. You only have to think about three things. There's one, R, time management. R stands for reading. And for reading, 90% of the students have issues with time management. They run out of time. Now, if given enough time, they might understand the entire passage. Vocabulary isn't that big of a problem for them. However, even with the smartest students, they do end up running out of time. And so that is really a big factor because even though their IQs are really, really high and they can read anything in the world, if they run out of time, that's such a shame. So you have to remember that with the standardized exams, this is the difference between the ACTs and the SATs and every other English test. For the English section, which is just simply testing grammar rules, there's only a handful of grammar rules to know for the ACTs. And once you know the 10 or 15 or so rules, then you're set to go. the problem with that is most students rely on intuition. They just go with whatever feels good to them or whatever sounds good to them. So in order to counteract that problem, what we are going to be doing at Makers is I am going to be telling the students to continue to work through every single rule that we're going to be learning a lot of times, again and again and again, until they can do it in their sleep without even thinking about it. For the science passage is where they are going to be testing a little bit more conceptual knowledge. Now before, on the paper SATs, the not new version, the conceptual knowledge questions were between 1 and 5. There weren't very many, but with the new changes, we predict that there's going to be a little bit more. So does that mean that you have to know a lot of advanced science, meaning like on the AP level or HL level? Not really. You just have to know basic science, but a lot of the students, they have forgotten that. And so we're going to be going over those basic concepts as well. Now, there are some very common pitfalls and solutions that we can offer for students. Pitfalls meaning, what are these common mistakes that students find themselves making on the ACTs? Well, for the English section, they approach it, like I said before, with what sounds the best. And this is normally the case for students whose English may be their first language or who didn't really take technical training for learning grammar. And so the fix for that is I will be going over the technical rules to break down grammar into subject, verb, object, and all of these various grammar words and rules in order for students to actually know why that sentence is going to be correct over something that might sound correct but is still the wrong answer. For reading, a very big weakness that students make is answering the questions too quickly, because they're looking at the time and they figure, oh my God, I only have 10 minutes left or 5 minutes left and I have 20 questions left to solve. What am I going to do? They're going to not read very carefully. But on the ACTs, and this is the biggest difference between the ACTs and the SATs, for the SATs, you can kind of get away with skim reading the passage and looking at the big picture. However, for the ACTs, you have to find the exact detail in the passage. You have to actually put your finger on the passage, and if you can't find that evidence point, the answer is probably not correct. And so that is what you have to train yourself to do. You have to read really, really quickly, but also efficiently and accurately. And we're going to try to fix those things in my class as well. So, and the last thing, for science, the biggest pitfall that students make with this is misreading the graphs. So there's going to be a lot of different graphs. There's not just one type. There might be pie graphs. There might be, the one that you saw before with the line graphs. There might be some graph that you have never seen in your life. They get very, very experimental. They get very creative with it. Sometimes I see a graph and I'm like, oh, what is this? But for each question, you don't necessarily need to read every single graph, nor every single passage. And so what you have to do is you have to check the part of the graph that is relevant to the question. So whether or not you're looking at the x-axis or the y-axis or the entire thing in general or even the right graph is going to matter for you to get the correct answer. So the fix for that would be circle units in the question and then match them to the graph label. Now you might think, wait, that's such a stupid mistake to make. But however, if you're being timed, that is a mistake that students make very frequently. And the course goals for the Makers ACT prep session is, number one, I want the students to master the new format. Because if they have been practicing with the paper exam so far, and they are suddenly pushed into taking the new digital version, then even though they are familiar with the questions, they might not be familiar with the format of the exam, and that might throw them off. And so I want them to understand exactly what type of format it is in first. Number two, I want them to boost their accuracy. So we are going to be timing the students up until their last second, and this is what separates taking the courses here versus by yourself, because if you take it by yourself, you don't have a trainer, me, to actually help the students time themselves, and they don't really know how much time they might be spending on each question or if they're making any improvements. So I want them to boost their accuracy with speed and the time strategies. Now, on average, ideally, they should spend about 67 seconds per question, and that's for reading. That's going to be different for the English section and the science section, but for reading, it should be about 67 seconds per question. Now, if they can bring that down, that would be perfect, but also it depends on the passage as well. Some other strategies that they can take is perhaps they could read the passage first and then solve the questions later, or perhaps they could look at the questions first and then look at the passage for the answer choices or for the evidence. So there are different reading strategies that is going to work for different students. So everything is a bespoke experience for the students. Number 3, I want them to reduce their stress on the exam. So a lot of the feedback that I get from the students is, they've done the course, they have done practice at home, and when they're doing the mock tests and when they are practicing by themselves, their scores are really great. They get perfect scores all the time or near perfect scores all the time. However, on exam day, on the real test day, their score is not as high as they have been seeing at home. So what is the reason for that? Well, that is because they experience test stress. They are burdened by, having to perform really, really well on the real one. And so their performance is not as optimal as they have been seeing when they have been practicing at home. And so in order to overcome that, they have to practice with these mock exams every single day as if it is the real one. And that is only going to come through if they actually come here and practice it like the real thing. And that is the situation that we are going to be trying to create for them, the conditions. Now, number 4, I want them to optimize performance with smart question triage. Now, see, this is why my eyes are really bad. Smart question triage, process of elimination. So another big pitfall of students is they think they know the correct answer, right? So because when you're teenagers, you think you know everything about the world. Your confidence level is like this. And you just choose the answer, and you're 100% sure that's the correct answer, and then you get it wrong. And so in order to counteract that, in order to make their accuracy level go up, we do need to practice with process of elimination. Even though it might seem like a waste of time, it really does make a difference in their score. Number 5, personalize. Focus on each student's weak areas. So if you are practicing at home by yourself, you may not necessarily know what your weak areas are. However, as a teacher, I can see which students are weak in what category, and then for them especially, I can give them some specific advice. And then for other students, I can tell them, okay, you can do this differently from the person sitting next to you because you have some different weaknesses, you have some different strengths, and so you have to approach it in a different way. So every single student is not going to be using the same exact strategy. They're all going to be different. And so that depends on the individual. And so they would need a trainer to tell them which strategy to use. So the success metrics are talking about, well, we did this in the course. How do I know that I have improved? Or what is the standard for improvement? So we are aiming for a 5 to 10 point average score increase. That would be the ideal. Now, if it's beyond 10 points, perfect. That's great. If it's a perfect score, that's even better. So that's what we're going to be aiming for. And the second success metric is lower test anxiety. And so this is one of the biggest advantages that you have with taking mock tests. And the third thing, custom study plans. And so again, the Makers ACT class is bespoke, okay? That is the key word that I'm going to leave you with today. It is a bespoke class. Everything is personalized for every single individual student. So these are some common questions that parents and the students ask me. Number 1, how early should my students start preparing for the ACTs, and how many times should I or should they take the exam? Now, there's no clear answer to this, but on average, I see students preparing from as young as middle school. Now, is that too early? No, because the ACTs is still testing for basic reading, basic grammar, basic science, and normally they start learning the science from middle school. And so it's not too early to start studying for it. Now, should they take the ACTs in middle school? No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying they should just start preparing the foundational skills to be prepared for that later on in their senior and junior years. And how many times should they take the exam? Ideally would be 3 times. Less than that would be better as well, but 3 times is ideal. Of course, you can take it more than that, up to 12 times, but the colleges don't really recommend that because if they see that you have taken the ACT 10 times, that might make them go, what happened to this student? Is the student not really good at taking the exam? It's kind of weird over here. So even if you take it 10 times and you get a perfect score after 10 times, well, that kind of decreases your credibility, right? So ideally it would be 3. Oh, and also, don't take it once. Probably you should take it at least a couple times in order to make use of the super score. And so what the super score is you can get your best score for each subject. And it doesn't matter which test you're pulling it from. It could be from the June exam. It could be from the December exam. You could take your best score from science from December and then add it to your best score from reading for June and then put it together, and that will be your super score. Another question that students have for me is, or parents have for me, why should we pay for a class instead of using free online resources? This is the biggest question, right? And that's a really good question because there's a lot of great free online resources. There's Kaplan, there's Khan Academy, there's Princeton, right? So many great resources. However, the biggest advantage that you have with coming to Makers is me. Okay, well, that's kind of arrogant of me to say, but the biggest advantage that classes have is they get a personalized experience, right? Because if you do this by yourself with free resources, then yeah, perhaps you might get a lot of questions to study from, and perhaps you might see a little bit of an increase in improvement in your score. However, you're not going to get an optimal increase in your score because as the student, you're not going to be very objective with what you are doing. You got to have a third person tell you what you are doing wrong and what you can improve on. Plus, you got to have somebody that's experienced in the test and really tell you how to attack it in what way and what your weaknesses are. And so if somebody is there pushing you along, and this is why you guys go to the gym, right? To get a PT, to get a personal trainer. Why don't you just, walk outside by yourself? Why don't you just run outside by yourself? Why do you go get a PT? It's the same thing. Somebody is pushing you, motivating you, helping you, telling you what you're doing wrong. And that is why you guys need to come to Makers. And I will leave you on that note. Thank you very much. Please come to Makers and you will be getting a perfect score. Thank you very much.